A lantern in the dark. The Harvest Vigil. Tales by Fireside by Anne Clay. You'd hardly know it was anything special if you didn't grow up in Bellewood. Just a lantern lit a little after sunset, swinging on the end of an old shepherd's hook by the Applegate. Just a trail of candle glow winding down toward the far field. Just a hush, a pause, and the unusual sound of laughter and fiddles from the square. But if you knew, you would remember. Then you'd know. Tonight was the vigil. And in Bellewood, that meant more than harvest. It meant remembrance. It meant promises. And if the wind was kind, it meant the beginning of something not yet named. You might have heard your grandmother speak of it, if she was the kind who still made cider by hand and set dry shoes by the hearth on cool October nights. You might have read about it in the margin of an almanac or in the notes of an old pastor who wasn't quite sure what to make of it. A pagan leftover, some muttered, but most simply called it what it was. The night the harvest watched back. And what a beautiful, particular night it was. In Bellewood, time wasn't only kept by clocks and candles. It was kept in rows of corn and hung garlands of bittersweet, in windows washed clean before the frost came, in cider that tasted sharper each week. The village lived by its seasons, and when the leaves began to turn, the people turned too, toward one another, toward their hearths, and toward the vigil. It always happened on the last full moon before the first frost, and you could feel it coming for days. The air would shift, not just colder, but expectantly, as if the hills held their breath. Children knew something was coming, though the younger ones couldn't name it. The older ones whispered about ghost stories and flickering shadows. Dogs grew restless. Lantern oil sold out, and suddenly, every woman with a worn apron and every man with a flask of something strong remembered what night it would soon be. The Harvest Vigil is not a party. There are no toasts, no dances, no shouted songs. That comes after, once the fields have slept. The vigil is a watch, a quieting, a night when the people of Bellewood honor everything that has passed. Seeds that grew, things that died, hands that worked, hearts that didn't get what they wanted. It begins when the moon rises above the bell tower and the first lantern is lit. Each family, each couple, each person, alone or together, walks the lantern trail down to the old field beyond the orchard where no crops have grown since the fire of '82. The ground there is reserved for stillness, for memories, for looking out into the dark and deciding who you are now that the harvest is done, and At the center of the field, a large iron brazier lit and tended all night by one chosen keeper. The fire is fed with dried stalks and shorn twine and apple peels and a little bit of the old hopes that didn't quite make it through the year. The rules, they're not written anywhere, of course, but everybody knows them. First, you bring a lantern, not a torch, a quiet light, not a loud one. Secondly, you walk, not ride. No carts, no shortcuts. Thirdly, you wear something of the earth, wool, linen, leather, or homespun, something that lets the harvest know you still belong to it. And fourth, you do not speak on the way down. You may speak at the fire or after, but the walk is for listening. The vigil is both a farewell and an invitation. Farewell to the long days. Farewell to what didn't ripen. Invitation to winter, to reflection, to healing, to firelight. There are many stories whispered about what happens during the vigil. Some say lovers are revealed there. Others say the ghosts walk with you. Still others claim the fire speaks, but only if you've told it the truth. This story begins with a woman named Celia Ward and a man named Jonas Hale. She was known for her candles, poured slow and clean from beeswax with a little bayberry in winter and rosehip in spring. He kept to himself, sharpening tools, fixing hinges, building fences no one remembered needing until they saw them standing. They had seen each other now and then, at the market, at the well, in passing, in errands. Their words numbered fewer than their glances, until the vigil. The first year Jonas Hale attended the vigil, he did so alone. He carried a lantern with no glass, only wire and smoke-stained mica. His coat smelled of pine resin and late hours. No one paid him much mind, just another silent man with a light and a reason. He stood far off from the others, nearer the edges of the field than the fire. The next year, Celia Ward noticed him there. She came late, having spent too long pouring last-minute candles by request, and arrived flushed, wind-blown, with wax still under her fingernails. She lit her lantern with a taper kissed from her hearth and walked the path alone, silently. But when she reached the field, her feet drifted, not toward the center fire, but to the edge where Jonas stood. Not beside him, not even close enough to be obvious, but near enough to share the air. They didn't speak. That was the rule. But she tilted her lantern slightly toward him, and he tilted his head just slightly in return. And that was enough. By the third year, Bellewood had begun to whisper. They stand together. She makes candles, and he won't look anyone in the eye. Of course they suit. But Celia didn't care. She had watched how Jonas moved, how he lit every lamp in the meeting house before anyone arrived, and how he fixed the broken pew hinge without being asked. And Jonas had seen how Celia left her window cracked on warm nights, how her candles smelled different depending on the season, and how she gave children half-burned test tapers just to see them smile. So that year, she brought an extra lantern. And when she reached the trailhead at dusk, she didn't walk alone. She stood there waiting, and Jonas arrived. And she handed it to him, just once, with no words. He took it, and they walked the lantern path together, their lights swinging in a slow rhythm, warm in the hush of the vigil. The center fire always knew. It was tended that year by Hester Oakes, the oldest midwife in Bellewood, whose hands had caught more lives than most had seen pass away. She saw them approach, not touching, not speaking, but carrying a warmth in the posture that even the fire respected. She stirred the coals with a long ash branch and looked up only once. "Together, are you?" she said, not sharply, not even nosily, just as fact. Celia looked to Jonas. Jonas looked at the fire. "Yes," he said. It was the first time he had said it aloud. The vigil is not short. It lasts until dawn. Most people stay a while, then drift home. A few stay the whole night. The oldest, the quietest, the broken-hearted, and the just beginning. Celia and Jonas stayed. They stood beside the fire until the flames were low and the field was nearly empty. They sat on a stump, side by side. They watched the embers turn to stars. And when he finally reached for her hand, she met him halfway, without hesitation, because the vigil doesn't require words, but it remembers truth. Ask anyone in Bellewood, and they'll tell you the vigil still happens every fall. The lanterns still light. The path still waits. The fire still stands. Some years, the sky is clear. Some years, it rains and the people bring shawls and waxed hoods. But still they come. Still they walk. Still they remember. And new things begin too. A girl walks beside another girl. A father carries a lantern for his son. Two old friends meet again and don't need to explain why. The vigil accepts them all, because harvest is not only about what is grown, it is about what remains. For those who seek to understand the true intricacies of the Harvest Vigil, here they are. Preparation begins 3 days before the full moon, when the firekeeper is chosen. This role is always given, never asked for. It is a gift of trust. At this time, lanterns are cleaned and trimmed with fresh wicks. Most are handed down. Some are made new each year. A few are shared by couples or families, always by mutual consent. At sundown, the first lantern is lit from the hearth of the town's oldest occupied home. That light is then carried to the trailhead and used to light all others. The lantern trail winds from the town square, through the edge of the orchard, down to the southern field. It is marked by low stones and old braided grass rope. No one may bring fire to this central brazier. It is already burning when they arrive. Each visitor feeds it with something meaningful: a dried blossom, a sprig of rosemary, a snip of thread, a sliver of wax. The fire is not extinguished at the end. It is left to die naturally, and the ashes are buried in a stone circle nearby. Well, you might want to know that Celia and Jonas married the next fall on the equinox. Their vows were spoken not in the church, but in the orchard where apples had just begun to fall. They said nothing about love, only about light and steadiness and the choice to stay. And every year afterward, they walked the vigil trail with a single lantern between them, not always hand in hand, sometimes arm in arm, sometimes quietly weeping, other times smiling, but always together. And one year, after the last frost, after the fire had burned low, a new child was born to them. They named her Hale Ward, after both. And when she was old enough to carry a lantern, she walked beside them, and the fire saw, and the fire remembered.